So today I'm going to be reading chapters 13 and 14 of Thomas Hobbes's famous social contract theory book, Leviathan. I have to read it for school, but I thought it would be more engaging if I made a video recording of myself reading it because I'm super narcissistic and that's appealing to me. So here we go, starting chapter 13. Of the natural condition of mankind as concerning their felicity and misery. Men by nature equal. Nature hath made men so equal in the faculties of the body and mind, as that though there be found one man sometimes manifestly stronger in body or of quicker mind than another, yet when all is reckoned together, the difference between man and man is not considerable, as that one man can thereupon claim himself any benefit, to which another may not pretend as well as he. Okay, so just so you know, when I get to the far right-hand side of the page, the copy I'm reading off of really kind of fades out into darkness. So my inflection is pretty bad because these are kind of long sentences, but I think it would be better if that wasn't happening. For as to the strength of body, the weakest has strength enough to kill the strongest, either by secret machination or by confederacy with others that are in the same danger with himself. And as to the faculties of the mind, setting aside the arta grouped upon words, and especially that skill of proceeding upon general and infallible rules called science, which very few have, but in few things, as being not a native faculty born with us, nor attained, as prudence, while we look after somewhat else, I find yet a greater equality amongst men than that of strength. For prudence is but experience which equal time equally bestows on all men in those things they equally apply themselves unto. That which may perhaps make such equality incredible is but a vain conceit of one's own wisdom, which almost all men think they have in a greater degree than the vulgar, that is, than all men but themselves, and a few others, whom by fame or for concurring with themselves they approve. For such is the nature of men, that howsoever they may acknowledge many others to be more witty, or more eloquent, or more learned, yet they will hardly believe there are many so wise as themselves, for they see their own wit at hand, and other men's at a distance. But this proveth rather than men are in that point equal, that unequal. For there is not ordinarily a greater sign of the equal distribution of anything than that every man is contented with his share. From equality proceeds difference. From this equality of ability ariseth equality of hope in the attaining of our ends. And therefore, if any two men desire the same thing, which nevertheless they cannot both enjoy, they become enemies. I need to zoom in. This is really small and I have to follow it with my cursor. It's kind of making me annoyed. Okay. Geez, I stopped mid-sentence. It was a semicolon, so it's fine. And in the way to their end, which is principally their own conservation, and sometimes their delectation only, endeavor to destroy or subdue one another. And from hence it comes to pass that where an invader hath no more fear than another man's single power, if one plant, sow, build, or possess a convenient seat Others may probably be expected to come prepared with those forces united, to dispossess and deprive him not only of the fruit of his labor, but also of his life or liberty. And the invader, again, is in the like danger of another. From difference war, and from this diffidence of one another. Okay, it's from diffidence more, and from this diffidence of one another. There is no way for any man to secure himself so reasonable as anticipation, that is, by force or wiles, to master the persons of all men he can, so long till he see no other power great enough to endanger him. And this is no more than his own conservation requireth, and is generally allowed. Also because there is some that, taking pleasure in contemplating their own power in the acts of conquest, which they pursue farther than their security requires, if others that otherwise would be glad to be at ease within modest bounds, should not by invision increase their powers, they would not be able, long time, by standing only on their defense, to subsist. And by consequence, such augmentation of domination over men being necessary to a man's conservation, it ought to be allowed him. Again, men have no pleasure, but on the contrary, a great deal of grief, in keeping company, where there is no power able to overawe them all. For every man looketh that his companion should value him, and at the same rate he sets upon himself, and upon all signs of contempt or undervaluing, naturally endeavors, as far as he dares, which amongst them that have no common power to keep them in quiet, is far enough to make them destroy each other, to extort a greater value from his contemners by damage, and from others by example. So that in the nature of man, we find three principal causes of quarrel. First, competition. Secondly, diffidence. Thirdly, glory. The first maketh men invade for gain, the second for safety, and the third for reputation. The first use violence to make themselves masters of other men's person, wives, children, and cattle. The second to defend them. The third for trifles, as a word, a smile, a different opinion, and any other signs of undervalue, either direct in their persons or by reflection in their kindred, their friends, their nation, their profession, or their name. I'm back again where the page is getting really cut out by fading on the end, so it's going to be annoying. Out of civil states, there is always war of everyone against. I'm assuming that's against everyone. Hereby it is manifest that during the time men live without a common power to keep them all in awe, they are in that condition which is called war. And such war as is of every man against every man. For war consisteth not in battle only, or the act of fighting, but in the tract of time wherein the will to contend by battle is sufficiently known, and therefore the notion of time is to be considered in the nature of war, as it is in the nature of weather. For as the nature of foul weather lieth not in a shower or two of rain, but in an inclination thereto of many days together. So the nature of war consisteth not in actual fighting, but in the known disposition thereto. During all of the time there is no assurance to the contrary. All other time is peace. The incommodities of such a war whatsoever therefore is consequent to a time of war, where every man is enemy to every man. The same is consequent to time, wherein men live without other security, that what their own strength and their own invention shall furnish them withal. In such condition there is no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea. No commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. And the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. It may seem strange to some man that has not well weighed these things. The nature should thus dissociate and render men apt to invade, and destroy one another. And he may therefore, not trusting to this inference made from the passions, desire perhaps to have the same confirmed by experience. Let him therefore consider with himself when taking a journey. He arms himself and seeks to go well accompanied. When going to sleep, he locks his doors. When even in his house, he locks his chest. And this is when he knows there be laws, and public officers armed to revenge all injuries shall be done to him. What opinion he has of his fellow subjects when he rides armed, of his fellow citizens, when he locks his doors, and of his children and servants, when he locks his chest? Does he not there as much accuse mankind by its actions as do I by my words? But neither of us accuse man's nature in it. The desires and other passions of man are in themselves no sin. No more are the actions that proceed from those passions, till they know a law that forbids them, which till laws be made they cannot know, nor can any law be made till they have agreed upon the person that shall make it. It may peradventure be thought that there was never such a time nor condition of war as this, and I believe it was never generally so over all the world. But there are many places where they live so now. For the savage people in many places of America, except the government of small families, and the concord whereof dependeth on natural lust, have no government at all, and live at this day in brutish manner, as I said before. Howsoever it may be perceived what manner of life there would be, where there were no common power to fear, by the manner of life, which men have no formerly lived under a peaceful government, used to degenerate into in a civil war. Okay, so in summary, he's saying that the nature of men is to fight each other and take things from people. He gives an example of even people living under a civilized society still lock their doors and stuff. So this shows that they have distrust of their fellow man. And he's saying that most people live under government rules, but if you look at people that lived in America, because this was written in like the 14 or 1500s, they didn't really have a strong government, and it was a bunch of people fighting each other. Okay. But though there had never been any time wherein particular men were in a condition of war one against another, yet in all times kings and persons of sovereign authority, because of their independency, are all continual jealousies, and in the state and posture of gladiators, having their weapons pointing and their eyes fixed on one another, that is, their forts, garrisons, and guns upon the frontiers of their kingdoms, and continual spies upon their neighbors, which is a posture of war. But because they uphold thereby the industry of their subjects, there does not follow it from that misery which accompanies the liberty of particular men. In such war is nothing unjust. To this war of every man against every man, this also is conquest, that nothing can be unjust. The notions of right and wrong, justice and injustice have no place. Where there is no common power, there is no law. Where there is no law, no injustice. Force and fraud are in war the two cardinal virtues. Justice and injustice are none of the faculties, neither of the body nor mind. If they were, they might be in a man that were alone in the world, as well as his senses and passions. They are qualities that relate to men in society, not in solitude. It is a consequent also to the same condition that there be no property, no dominion, no mine and thine distinct, but only that to be every man's that he can get, and for so long as he can keep it, and thus much of the ill condition which mere men's nature actually placed in it, though with a possibility to come out of it, consisting partly in the passions, partly in his reason. So he's saying it's not really immoral to be a huge scumbag when there's nothing governing people. It's not a question of whether or not they have crappy morals or not. The natural state, I guess I would phrase it as regress to, but I don't think that would be his opinion, is a state of every man for himself, and it's not innately immoral or sketchy. The passions that incline men to peace. The passions that incline men to peace are fear of death, desire of such things as are necessary to commodious living, and a hope by their industry to obtain them. And reason suggests convenienteth articles of peace upon which many men may be drawn to agreement. These articles are they which otherwise called the laws of nature and nature, whereof I shall speak more particularly in the 2 following chapters. So he's saying that basically people come to agreements because they don't want to die and they need to get the stuff they need to have a comfortable life. So this makes them agree on stuff and set rules sometimes. Chapter 14, of the first and second natural laws and of contracts. Right of nature what? The right of nature, which writers commonly call jus naturel, I'm going to assume that's French, so we will say jus naturel, is the liberty each man hath to use his own power as he will himself for the preservation of his own nature, that is to say, of his own life, and consequently of doing anything which is his own judgment and reason he shall conceive to be the aptest means thereunto. Liberty. What? Just kidding. Liberty, what? By liberty is understood, according to the proper signification of the word, the absence of external impediments, which impediments may oft take away part of a man's power to do what he would, but cannot hinder him from using the power left him, according as his judgment and reason shall dictate unto him. A law of nature what? Difference of right and law. A law of nature, lex naturalis, is a precept or general rule found out by reason, by which a man is forbidden to do that which is destructive of his life, or taketh away the means of preserving the same, and to omit that by which he thinketh is may be the best preserved. For though that they speak of this subject, use to confound jus and lex, right and law, yet they ought to be distinguished, because right consisteth in liberty to do or to forbear, whereas law determineth and bindeth to one of them, so that law and right differ as much as obligation and liberty, which in one and the same matter are inconsistent. So what does that mean? So he's basically setting out certain conditions. I gather that much. Okay, so the difference between right and wrong and following the law. Right and wrong, you have the freedom to do it. In law, you are forced to do it. Pretty much. Naturally, every man has right to everything, the fundamental law of nature. And because the condition of man, as hath been declared in the precedent chapter, is a condition of war of everyone against everyone, in which case everyone is governed by his own reason, and there is nothing he can make use of that may not help unto him in preserving his life against his enemies. It followeth that in such condition every man has a right to everything, even to one another's body, and therefore as long as the natural right of every man to everything endureth, there can be no security to any man, how strong or wise soever he be, of living out that time, which nature ordinarily alloweth men to live, and consequently it is precept or general rule of reason that every man ought to endeavor peace as far as he has hope of obtaining it, and when he cannot obtain it, that he may seek it and use all helps and advantages of war. The first branch of which rule containeth the first and fundamental law of nature, which is to seek peace and follow it. The second, the sum of the right of nature, which is by all means we can to defend ourselves. So he's saying that people will seek peace and they'll do it any way they can. The second law of nature. From this fundamental law of nature by which men are condemned to endeavor peace is derived the second law, that a man be willing when others are so too, as for fourth, as for peace, and defendance of himself, he shall think it necessary to lay down this right to all things, and be contented with so much liberty against other men as he would allow other men against himself. For as long as every man holdeth this right, or doing anything he liketh, so long are all men in the condition of war. But if other men will not lay down their right as well as he, then there is no reason for anyone to divest himself of his. For that were to expose himself to prey, which no man is bound to, rather than dispose himself to peace. There is that law of the gospel, whatsoever you require that others should do to you, that do ye to them. And that law of men, quod tibi feri non vis, alteri ne fersis. I think that's actually Latin. I don't know any of those words. I only took 1 year of Latin, and it was in 10th grade, and I'm 29. Okay. What is to lay down a right? To lay down a man's right to anything is to divest himself of the liberty, hindering another of the benefit of his own right to the same. For he that renounceth or passeth away his right giveth not to any other man a right which he had not before. Because there is nothing to which every man had not right by nature, but only standeth out of his way, and that he may enjoy his own original right, without hindrance from him, not without hindrance from another, so that the effect which redoundeth to one man by another man's defect of right is but so much diminution of impediments to use the right of his own right original. That was a really complex sentence. It had a lot of TH endings. Again, this was written in a different time. It's kind of incoherent when I read it at first, and I'm glad that the teacher provides a summary. So he's talking something about how people are going to take what they want, but I think he's kind of leading towards sometimes they're going to compromise and say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this. Renouncing a right, what it is. Transferring right, what? Obligation, duty, and justice. Right is laid aside either by simply renouncing it or by transferring it to another. By simply renouncing, when he cares not to whom the benefit thereof redoundeth. By transferring, when he is intendeth the benefit thereof to some certain person or persons. And when a man hath in either manner abandoned or granted away his right, then he is said to be obliged or bound not to hinder those whom such right is granted or abandoned from the benefit of it, and that he ought, and in his duty, not to make void that voluntary act of his own, and that such hindrance is injustice and injury, and being sine jure, the right being before renounced or transferred, so that injury or injustice in the controversies of the world is somewhat like to that which in the disputations of scholars is called absurdity. For as they are called an absurdity to contradict what one maintained in the beginning, in so the world is called injustice and injury, voluntarily to undo that which from the beginning he had voluntarily done, that by way which a man either simply renounceth or transferreth his right is a declaration or signification by some voluntary and sufficient signs or signs that he doth so renounce or transferreth, or hath so renounced, or hath transferred to the same, to him that accepteth it. And these signs are either words only or actions only, or, as it happeth most of the time, both words and actions. And the same are the bonds by which men are bound and obligated, bonds that have their own strength, not from their own nature, For nothing is more easily broken than a man's word, but for fear of some evil consequence upon rupture. So he's saying you can give up your rights, but you can do it verbally or with a contract, but once you give it up, you can't take it back because that's douchey, and you can't take it back not because you think it's the right thing to do, but because you don't want to suffer the consequences of taking it back. Not all rights are alienable. Whensoever a man transferreth his right, or renounceth it, it is either in consideration of some right reciprocally transferred to himself, or from some other good he hopeth for thereby. For there is a voluntary act, and of the voluntary acts of every man, the objects of some good to himself, and therefore there be some rights which no man can be understood by any words or other signs to have abandoned or transferred. At first a man cannot lay down the right of resisting them that assault him by force to take away his life, because he cannot be understood to aim thereby at any good himself. The same may be said of wounds and of chains and imprisonment, both because there is no benefit consequent to such patience, and there is to patience of suffering to another to be wounded or imprisoned, and also because a man cannot tell, when he seeth men proceed against him by violence, whether they intend his death or not. And lastly, the motive and end for which this renouncing and transferring of rights is introduced is nothing else but to the security of a man's person in his life, and in the means of co-preserving life, as not be wary of it. And therefore, if a man by words or other signs seems to despoil himself of the end for which those signs were intended, he is not to be understood as if he meant it, or that it was his will, but that he was ignorant of how such words and actions were to be interpreted. I accidentally disassociated during most of that paragraph, so I really didn't retain any of the meaning. Sorry. Contract what? The mutual transferring of right is that which men call contract. Oh yeah, he was saying that usually people don't give up their rights for no reason. They do it because they expect something in return. So contract what? Contract what? The mutual transferring of right is that which men call contract. There is difference between transferring of right to the thing and transferring or tradition, that is delivery of the thing itself. For the thing may be delivered together with the translation of the right, as buying and selling with ready money or exchange of goods or lands. It may be delivered some time after. Covenant what? Again, one of the contractors may deliver the thing contracted for on his part, and leave the other to perform his part at some determinable time after, and in the meantime be trusted, and then the contract on his part is called pact or covenant. Or both parties may contract now to perform hereafter, in which cases that he that is to perform in time to come, being trusted, his performance is called keeping of promise, or faith, or the failing of promise, if it be voluntary, violation of faith. So he's saying that when you make the contract, you don't have to give up your part immediately. The other person it can be kind of agreed upon that you're going to do it eventually. And if you break that, then you fucked up. Or violation of faith. And by or, I mean also referred to as. Okay, on with our reading. Free gift. When the transferring of right, I'm surprised it didn't say free gift what? I wish it did. Free gift. When the transferring of right is not mutual, but one party transferreth in hope to gain thereby friendship or service from another, or from his friends, or in hope to gain the reputation of charity or magnanimity. I know how to say the word, I just can't fucking say it, because I never say it out loud. Magnanimous. Magnanimity. I can't say it. It's the adjective of magnanimous, or to deliver his mind from the pain of compassion, or hope, or reward in heaven. This is not contract, but gift, or free gift. So if you give something and hoping to get something in return, but it's not agreed upon, that's giving somebody something, duh. It was so long just to say that. Grace. Which words signify one and the same thing? Signs of contract express promise. Signs of contract are either express or by inference. Express are words spoken with understanding of what they signify, and such words are either of time, present or past, as I give, I grant, I have, I. Different words that signify an explicit gift giving. So this is explicit. Signs of contract by inference. Signs by inference are sometimes the consequences of words, sometimes the consequences of silence, sometimes the consequences of action, sometimes the consequences of forbearing an action, and generally a sign by inference of contract is whatsoever sufficiently argues the will of the contractor. So you can also imply contract, which isn't really, I feel like that kind of goes against the definition of a contract, because a contract is meant to be explicit, not implied. And honestly, if you're going to take the time to make a contract, even a verbal one, you should probably just go the explicit route, in my opinion, because people are really stupid. And by inference, I'm not relying on inference. I need to explicitly state things to people if I really care, I guess. Okay. Free gift passeth by words of the present or past. Words alone, if they be of the time to come and contain a bare promise, are an insufficient sign of a free gift, and therefore not obligatory. For if they be of time to come, as tomorrow I will give, they are a sign I have not given yet, and consequently that my right is not transferred, but remaineth till I transfer it by some other act. But if words be of the time present or past, as I have given, or do I give to be delivered tomorrow, then it is my tomorrow's right given away today, and that by virtue of the words, though there were no other argument of my will, and there is a great difference in the signification of these words. More Latin. Volo hoc tum esse cras and cras dabo, that is, between I will this be thine tomorrow, and I will giveth it to thee tomorrow. And from the word I will, in the former manner of speech, signifies an act of the will present, but in the latter it signifies a promise of an act of the will to come. And therefore the former words, being of the present, transfer a future right, the latter, that be of the future, transfer nothing. But if the words be other signs of the will to transfer a right besides words, then, though the gift be free, yet may the right be understood to pass by words of the future, as if a man propound a prize to him that comes first to the end of a race, the gift is free. And though the words be of the future, yet the right to passeth. For if he would not have his words to be understood, he should not have let them run. So this is about semantics. You can give stuff in the future and have it hold now, or you can phrase stuff in a way that gives stuff in the future and doesn't hold now, and it can still be rescinded, which is, honestly, that was kind of a waste of time to write that much about it, especially when the preceding paragraph was about implied gifting. So, like, if you're going to allow implied gifting by non-specified gesture and then really get into semantics with future gifts, then, man, that was kind of a waste of time. I'm going to say that paragraph was a total waste of time. Signs of contract are words both of past, present, and future. In contract, the right passeth, not only where the words are from time present or past, but also wherein they are of the future, because all contract is mutual translation or change of right, and therefore he hath promised only because he hath already received the benefit for which he hath promised this, is to be understood as if he intend the right should pass. For unless he had been content to have his words so understood, the other would not have performed his part first. And so for that case, in buying and selling and other acts of contract, a promise is equivalent to a covenant and therefore obligatory. So if you're gifting, you can rescind it based on semantics, but if you're doing a transaction where you're gifting with the explicit intent to get something in return, then you can't really rescind it, even if you phrase it in the way that he said you could take it back, because the person wouldn't have given you something if you didn't if they weren't expecting something, so you entered into a contract and you can't take it back. Merit. What? He hath performed first in the case of contract, that is, to merit that which he is to receive by the performance of the other, and he hath it due. Also, when a prize is pronounced to many, which is to be given to him only that winneth, or money is thrown amongst many, to be enjoyed by them to catch it, though this be a free gift, yet to do so win, or so to catch, is merit, and to have a is due. For the right is transferred to the propounding of the prize, and in throwing down the money, there, though it be not determined by whom, but by the event of the contention. But there is between these two sorts of merit this difference, that in contract I merit by virtue of my own power, and the contractor's need, but in the case of free gift I am enabled to merit only by benignity of the giver. In contract I merit at the contractor's hand, he should depart with his right. In this case of gift, I merit not that the giver should part with his right, but that when he has parted with it, it should be mine rather than another's. And this I think to be the meaning of that distinction of the schools between meritum congrui and meritum condigni. For God Almighty, having promised paradise to those men hoodwinked with the carnal desires that can walk through this world according to the precepts and limits prescribed by him, they say that shall so walk shall merit paradise ex congruo, but because no man can demand a right to it by his own righteousness or by any other power himself, but by the free grace of God only, there say, no man can merit paradise ex condigno. This, I say, I think, is the meaning of that distinction. But because disputers do not agree upon the signification of their own terms of art longer than it serves their turn, I will not affirm anything of their meaning. Only this I say, when a gift is given indefinitely as a prize to be contended for, that he winneth meriteth, and may claim that prize is due. So again, he seems to be making distinctions between certain phrasings, and I kind of didn't really take anything away from that paragraph because it was A, confusing, B, I had a lot of Latin, and I think the last sentence is really just a summary. So it's saying if somebody gives a prize, like, you get this if you do this, anybody gets this if they do this, and then you do this, you should be able to get this. So I think that's what he meant with all of that. Covenants of mutual trust. When invalid, if a covenant be made wherein neither of the parties perform presently, but trust one another, in the condition of mere nature, which is upon a condition of war of every man against every man, upon any reasonable suspicion, is void. But if there be so common power set over both of them, with right and force sufficient to compel performance, is not void. For he hath performeth first, but has no assurance of other will to perform after, because the bonds of words are too weak to bridle man's ambition, avarice, anger, and other passions, without the fear of some conceived power, which in the condition of mere nature, where all men are equal, and judges of the justness of their own fears, cannot possibly be supposed. And therefore he which performeth first does not but betray himself to his enemy, contrary to the right. He can never abandon of defending his life by means of living. Okay, this is getting really long-winded, and it's honestly just a bunch of rules about getting into contracts. He's not even really talking about the social contract. He's talking about rules for entering the social contract. And it's boring. Okay. I'm not going to stop so much and explain because I'm just going to... Unless he has something meaty, he's just saying a bunch of arbitrary rules for entering in contracts. These are not the law. These are how he thinks law should be. And this was written in the 14 or 1500s, so it doesn't matter. But in civil estate, whereas, is this where I started? Yes. But in civil estate, where there is a power set up to constrain those that would otherwise violate their faith, that fear is no more reasonable, and for that cause, he which by the covenant is to perform first is obligated to do so. The cause of fear, which maketh such convenient and invalid, must be always something arising after the covenant made, as some new fact or other sign of the will not to perform, else it cannot make the covenant void. For that which could not hinder a man from promising ought not to be admitted as hindrance of performing. Right to the end containeth right to the means. He that transferreth any right transferreth the means of enjoying it, as far as layeth in his power. And he has selleth land is understood to transfer herbage and I guess herbage, and whatever grows upon it. Nor can he sell a mill, turn away the stream that drives it. And he hath given to man the right of government and sovereignty, are understood to give him the right of levying money to maintain soldiers, and of appointing magistrates for the administration of justice. So when you agree to accept the government, you say they can tax you and form armies and shit. No covenant with beasts. To make covenant with brute beasts is impossible, because no understanding our speech, they understand not, nor accept of any translation of right, nor can translate any right to another. Without mutual exception, there is no covenant. You can't make promises with animals. Nor with God without special revelation. I'm just going to skip this paragraph. No covenant but of possible and future. The matter or subject of a covenant is always something that falleth under deliberation, for a covenant is an act of the will, that is to say, an act, and last act of deliberation, and is therefore always understood to be something to come, and which is judged possible for him that covenant to perform. And therefore it promise to which is known to be impossible, no covenant. But if that prove impossible afterwards, which before was thought possible, this covenant is valid and bindeth, though not to the thing itself, yet to the value, or if also be impossible, to the unfeigned endeavor of performing as much as possible, for no more man can be obliged. Covenants how made void. Men are freed of covenants in two ways, by performing or being forgiven. For performance is the natural end of obligation, and forgiveness the restitution of liberty, as being retransferred of that right in which the obligation considered. Covenants extorted by fear are valid. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. The former covenant to one makes void the latter to another. The former covenant makes void the latter. For a man that hath passed away his right to one man today hath not to pass tomorrow to another, and therefore the latter promise passeth no right, but is null. I think that's kind of easy to understand. A man's covenant not to defend himself is void. A covenant not to defend myself from force by force is always void. Okay, there's a lot of unnecessary elaboration following, but I think you get the idea. No man obligated to accuse himself. A covenant to accuse oneself without assurance of pardon is likewise invalid. For in the condition of nature, where every man is judge, there is no place for accusation, and in the civil state, accusation is followed with punishment, which being force, a man is not obligated to resist. The same is also true of the accusation of those by whose condemnation a man falls into misery, as a father, wife, or benefactor. For the testimony of such an accuser, if it not be willingly given, is presumed to be corrupted by nature, and therefore not to be received, and where a man's testimony is not to be credited, he is not bound to give it. Also, accusations upon torture are not to be reputed as testimonies, for torture is to be used as a means of conjecture and light, and in the further examination and search of truth, and what is in case confessed tendeth to the ease of him that is tortured, not to the informing of the torturers, and therefore ought not to have the credit of a sufficient testimony, or whether he delivered it himself by true or false accusation. He does it by the right of preserving his own life. Wow, okay, so that's moderately progressive, that confessions made under torture or promises made under torture don't really count because the person's just trying to stop get tortured. I feel like we still struggle with that one today. Um, but my man Hobbes knew it. The end of an oath, the form of an oath. The force of words being, as I have formerly noted, too weak to hold men to the performance of their covenants. Oh God, is this really just going to be more boring? Okay, this is just more rules. I'm skipping this. It's boring. The third, do I have to read 12 through 15? Okay, no, it's just, nope, that's the end of our reading. So, in summary, if there are no laws and promises and agreements among people, they're just going to kill each other and steal from each other. But people can follow a lengthy set of rules in order to make such agreements not to do these things.